All right, guys. So now it's time to move on to deleting a post. So to delete a post, remember, we're going to start off with our decorator, and it's going to request or it's going to require a delete HTTP request, right? And then the URL is going to be the same. So it's going to be posts, and then we're going to need the ID so we can figure out which post to actually delete. All right, then let's define our function. So I'm just going to call this delete post. And so here we have to implement the logic for deleting post. So what are we going to do? Well, for me, there's many different ways. Deleting a post is just a matter of trying to figure out which specific dictionary within this array has a specific ID of whatever ID we give it. And then we just remove it from the array. So however you want to do it, go ahead and do it. I'm going to just show you the first way that I thought of. Like I said, this doesn't actually have anything to do with Fast API. This is more of just simply working with Python. So I'm telling you right up front, this may not be the most efficient way to do it. But like I said, we're eventually going to implement a real database. So it doesn't really matter how you do it as long as it works. And so the first thing that we're going to do is I'm going to look and to find the index in the array that has required ID. So we're going to look for what we're going to try to get the index of that specific item. And then all we're going to do is we'll do a my underscore posts dot pop and then just pass in the index. And so that's how we remove it from that array. Pretty simple. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually just define a function out here just to keep things simple. So this is going to be called find underscore index underscore post. And then we're going to pass in the ID that we're interested in. And then we're going to iterate over the array, but we're also going to grab the specific index as we iterate over it. And so you do that by using enumerate. So this is going to iterate over it. We'll get the access to the individual post that we're iterating over, as well as the index. And so we'll say if the ID equals ID, and I forgot the in keyword here, we'll just return I. So this is going to give us the index of the dictionary with that specific ID. So here we can just call that function and we'll set it equal to the index. So index equals find underscore index of post, pass in ID. So we now have the index. And at this point, I can just do a my posts dot pop and then just pass in index. And then we'll try to do a return. And then here I'm just going to pass in, we'll say message. And we'll say post was successfully deleted. So let's give this a shot. So first of all, let's get all the posts. Right, if I do a get all posts, you'll see that we have 2 posts. And then I'm going to create a new request. And this will be called delete post. Just going to copy that URL, pass it in there. And so here I'm going to try and delete with a post of a value of 1. And I realized I still left it as get, so we're going to change this to delete. All right, and so now it throws an error. So what exactly happened? Well, if we go back to here and then go back to our console, it says none type object cannot be interpreted as an integer. And I realized I forgot to actually pass in ID into our function, so that's why it was giving us that error. So now let's try this again. And we see that we get the message that says post was successfully deleted. That's good. However, you'll see that the status code is 200. And so if we actually go back to our status codes, you'll see that there's a specific status code that we should be using for when we delete something. And that status code is a 204. And like I said, you can read the documentation, but this is something that just, comes with time of working with APIs. So you'll know that anytime you want to delete something, you want to use a 204. But before we actually do that, let's verify that it actually deleted it. So we'll go to get posts and I'll send a request and we can see that there's only 1 post. So it clearly did work. But let's update the status code. So do you guys remember how to update the status code? the default status code of a specific path operation, we just pass in status code into the decorator, and then we'll do status, and then we'll just get our 204. Now let's try to delete something again. We'll try to delete, where's my delete? We'll try to delete post one again. Let's see what happens. So you'll see here that we get the 204, so everything looks good. We didn't get any data back. And if we go back to our application, you'll see that we got an error, which says too much data for declared content length. And what's happening here is I actually had to look up this error, and that's because anytime you send back a 204, the idea is that since we delete anything, we shouldn't really be sending any data back. And so when we try to send this message back, Fast API essentially throws an error saying like, listen, you're sending a 204, we should not be sending anything back. So that's how they kind of implemented Fast API. And so what you should be doing is, what we should do is actually just delete this. We should grab the response and then just pass in status code, status, HTTP 204, right? So basically, we don't want to actually send any data back anytime someone deletes something. We just want to send a 204. And then one of the requirements for that to work is that we don't send any data back. I know it's a little confusing. If you actually just Google this error, you'll probably get better explanation. But 204, when you delete something, you don't want to send any data back. That's kind of the expected result. So let's try this again. Let's send it to. All right, so we got the 204, no data comes back, and no errors. So that's all we have to do. So this is just something special that you have to do for delete within Fast API. Just keep that in mind. It's more of just a copy, a cut and paste type scenario. However, before we wrap up this delete video, we are still running into one tiny issue. If I try to grab an ID that doesn't exist, let's see what happens. Well, now we get a 500 error. And we get an error because, well, none type object cannot be interpreted as an integer. So since we tried to grab the index from this find index post, it's going to return nothing because there's no post that has an ID of 5. So we get nothing, and then we try to pop with an index of none. That creates an error. So we need to put in a simple if statement to actually catch that scenario. So we'll say if index equals none. So it'll return none if it doesn't exist. What are we going to do? Well, we're going to raise an exception again. So we can use that raise HTTP exception, and we'll just say status code equals, in this case, we want to send a 404 like we normally do. So we'll say status.http 404. And then we can send a detailed message. So in this case, we'll do once again another F string. And we'll say post with ID, pass the ID, does not exist. So let's try this out. Perfect. 404, post with ID does not exist. Let's just make sure we didn't break the original functionality. We delete it. Perfect. And let's just double check there's no errors. There we go. So everything looks good to go, guys. So we'll wrap up this video, and then in the next video, we'll take a look at how we can update posts. All right, guys, we're almost done with all of our CRUD operations. The final one is update. So let's create a new request. We're going to call this update post. And I'm just going to grab the URL from the delete post because it's going to follow the same exact structure. So we're going to pass the ID of the post that we want to update. Now, since we are updating it, we need our front end, or in this case, Postman, to actually send the data that we want to update with. So since we are working with posts and we take a look at our structure of our posts, it's very simple. We just have title, content, and then, published as well if you want to add that in ratings as well. And I'm actually going to remove that. So I don't actually want to have that. We'll keep it in for now, but we'll definitely remove that a little bit later on. And so if I go back to Postman, we can go to our body and then provide all of those fields. So we'll go to raw and then JSON. So this is just like when we were trying to create a post, we just pass that data in. And so here we'll get the title and we'll give it a new title. So updated title. So this this update request is just going to update the title. Now, we are going to use the put method. So with put method, we have to actually pass in the data for all of the fields, right? We want to pass in what the final post will look like after we update it. We don't just want to pass in the fields that we want to update. So if I go to, let's say, um, post one, right? We have the title and then we have the content. So if I wanted to update just the title, right, I would make sure that I pass the content as well. So I'm just going to copy this. Since we're not updating it, I'm just going to send back the same exact content. All right, and then this is going to be a put operation. All right, and so this is what the request is going to look like. Now let's go to our code and let's actually create our path operation for that. So here we're going to do app.put. This is going to go to posts ID. And then we'll define our function. I'm going to call this update post. We're going to get the ID and I'm going to convert that to an int. And then one other thing, right? Because we are receiving data from the front end, just like we did for creating a post, we want to make sure that it adheres to a very strict structure. So we have to use, so I want to use our schema again so that the front end can't just send whatever it wants to. Now I can create a new model called class, update post, and then we can pass in all the fields that we expect. However, it's going to be the same thing as the post because we expect a title, content, and then any of the other fields, depending on what we want ultimately. But it's going to be a post, so it doesn't make sense to create a new schema. We can just use the pre-existing schema. And so here, I'm just going to pass in post and make this type of post so that it's going to make sure that the request comes in with the right schema. And then for now, I'm just going to hard code the return to be a message. And I'll just say updated post. And then here I'm going to do a print. Let's just see what the post looks like. All right, so we were able to extract all of that data, so perfect. And then what we're going to do now is there's a couple things. So first things first, I need to find the index that of the post with this specific ID. So just like we did with delete, I'm just going to copy this. Actually, we can copy all of this right here because if that ID doesn't exist, we want to send a 404. So we can reuse all of that logic. But if we did find an index, that means we do need to update it. So what I'm going to do is we're going to grab post_dict, which equals post.dict. So that's going to take the data we receive from our front end, which is stored in post, and it's going to convert it to a dictionary. That's all it's doing. And then what I want to do is I want to set post_dict of ID to be equal to ID. So we're going to set the ID inside this new dictionary to be that ID. And then we're going to say my_post. And then we're going to pass in the index of the specific post we want to update and set that equal to post_dict. And then lastly, we're going to return, I'll say data, and we're going to return our new post, which is going to be post_dict. So let's just quickly recap what's happening. So first of all, the user is going to send a put request to the specific ID of the post he wants to update. And we're going to just do a quick check. So we're going to see if we can find what is the index of that specific post within my posts array. If it doesn't exist, then we're just going to throw a 404. If it does exist, if it doesn't exist, we're going to throw a 404. If it does exist, well, first thing, we're going to take all the data we received from the front end, which is stored in post. We're going to convert it to a regular Python dictionary. And then we're going to add the ID so that this final dictionary has the ID built in. And then we're going to say for the post within index, we're going to just replace it with our new post_dict. So that's how we update that specific spot in the array. And so let's give this a shot. So if I do get all posts, right, we can see we have post one, and then the title is title of post one. And then let's go to our update, and we can see that we're going to change the title to be updated title. And let's see if that works. Okay, so it looks like it worked. We got back the new post. So let's do a get all posts again, and let's see if it actually did update. And we can see that it did, in fact, update. Now, just to make sure everything else is good, let's also change the content. So let's say this is the new content. Let's send an update. And then we're going to run this again. And we can see that the content is updated. So now we're able to successfully update each and every post. And that's going to wrap up all of our CRUD operations. So you can see that building out an API, building out your CRUD functionality is fairly straightforward within Fast API. We've got one more lesson where we're just going to restructure our code a little bit just to make things a little bit cleaner. And then we're going to start getting to the fun stuff, which is working with databases. So I'm going to show you guys how we can actually get a Postgres database installed on our machines and running, and then we'll actually start saving data into an actual database. In this lesson, we're going to talk about one of my favorite features of Fast API, and that is the built-in support for documentation.